Um, what if I told you that the absolute worst thing an artist can do is express their true feelings?
I mean, it sounds completely backwards, doesn't it?
It really does. Because, like, putting your actual bleeding heart onto a canvas or, pouring your authentic, unfiltered trauma into a song.
Right, which is what everyone wants right now.
Exactly. But what if doing that practically guarantees that your art is going to be fundamentally flawed?
To modern ears, that statement borders on heresy.
Mhm.
I mean, we've been culturally conditioned to believe that the ultimate goal of any creative act is pure self-expression.
Yeah, usually when we look at a piece of art or read a poem or listen to this groundbreaking new album, there's this automatic expectation that we're looking at a direct x-ray of the artist's soul.
Right, we treat it exactly like a diary entry.
We really do. You hear a heartbreaking lyric and you just immediately assume the artist is pouring their literal personal heartbreak onto the page.
We point to it and say, there it is. That is their personal truth, and that's why it's brilliant.
Because we desperately want to find the human being behind the microphone. It's comforting.
It is. We love the narrative of the isolated, tortured genius,
Yes.
right? The person who unlocks something entirely unique to their own psychology and just unleashes it onto the world.
But then you step into the world of modern literary criticism, and specifically, you encounter the work of T.S. Eliot.
And suddenly that X-ray machine is just completely shattered.
Totally broken. We end up looking at a creative landscape that is entirely hostile to that romantic ideal of the bleeding heart artist.
It is the absolute destruction of the diary entry theory of art. T.S. Eliot basically looks at our obsession with the artist's personal feelings, their biography, their quirky individual trauma.
And he tells us we are looking in the completely wrong direction.
Not just slightly off either. He means fundamentally philosophically wrong.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because today we are taking you with us on a mission to decode a truly foundational text. We are doing a deep dive into excerpts from T.S. Eliot's highly influential 1919 essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent.
Yeah, and the goal here is to explore exactly how this single essay shattered the conventional idea that art is merely the expression of personal feelings.
And we're going to unpack Eliot's radical, almost mind-bending reimagining of how the past and the present interact with each other.
It is incredibly difficult to overemphasize just how influential this piece of writing has been. I mean, published over a century ago, it essentially dictated the terms of engagement for generations of poets, critics, and theorists.
It fundamentally changed how literature was studied in universities all over the world for like half a century.
Exactly. And Eliot essentially tackles two massive concepts here. First, he completely rebrands the concept of tradition.
Right.
And second, he argues for this aggressively impersonal theory of poetry.
Okay, let's start with that first concept, the T word, tradition. Because Eliot starts this essay by making a very sharp, almost sarcastic observation about how we use the word tradition, specifically in the English-speaking world.
Yeah, he points out that it's almost exclusively used as a weapon, like it's an insult.
He notes that we seldom speak of tradition unless we're, deploring its absence or using it as a phrase of censure.
Right, if a critic calls a contemporary writer too traditional, it's basically a polite way of saying they're boring or unoriginal or just stubbornly stuck in the past.
Right. And even in those rare moments when it isn't used as an outright insult, Eliot says it's used with this vague approval that implies and I love this phrasing, a pleasing archaeological reconstruction.
It's such a vivid picture. It paints tradition as this dusty museum exhibit.
Like, oh, how nice, you rebuilt a 16th century sonnet perfectly. Let's put it behind glass with the dinosaur bones.
Exactly. It's agreeable to us only because of the comfortable, reassuring science of archaeology, which implies that tradition is dead, it's buried, it's safe.
So what's fascinating here is how Eliot contrasts this English attitude with the French critical habit.
Right. He suggests that every nation is totally oblivious to the shortcomings of its own critical habits.
We look at the massive volume of critical writing produced in France, and the English mind unconsciously concludes that the French are just, more critical than we are.
And therefore perhaps less spontaneous or less naturally creative. But Eliot reminds us that criticism is as inevitable as breathing.
We're always criticizing. We're always judging, evaluating, and categorizing, even when we don't realize we're doing it.
And he argues that we should be articulating what happens in our minds when we read a book and feel an emotion about it.
But because we don't rigorously examine our own critical habits, we fall into a massive trap. And the trap is basically this. When we praise a poet, we instinctively focus on the aspects of their work where they least resemble anyone else.
We look for the anomaly. We actively try to isolate the artist from their context.
Right. Eliot writes that we pretend to find what is individual, what he calls the peculiar essence of the man.
We dwell with this deep, almost smug satisfaction on how a poet differs from their predecessors.
We dig around in the text trying to find something that can be totally isolated just so we can enjoy it as a pure novelty.
Yeah.
But wait, let me push back on this because I think a lot of people listening right now would agree with that trap. Like, why shouldn't we celebrate the rule breakers?
It's a fair question.
Why is it a trap to look for what makes an artist unique? If I'm listening to a new artist, I want to hear something I've never heard before. I don't want a watered-down version of someone who died 300 years ago. So why are we so obsessed with the idea of the isolated genius, and why does Eliot think that obsession is a mistake?
It's a really great point, and it gets to the heart of our sort of post-romantic hangover. We've equated originality with isolation.
Okay, explain that.
Well, we think that to be truly yourself, to have an authentic voice, you have to owe absolutely nothing to anyone else. You must be a completely self-made island of creativity.
Right.
But Eliot argues that if we can just drop this prejudice for a moment, we will find something incredibly counterintuitive. He argues that not only the best, but the most deeply individual parts of a poet's work may actually be the parts where the dead poets, their ancestors, assert their immortality most vigorously.
That is such a wild, almost spooky concept. The
Yeah.
moments where you think an artist is being the most uniquely themselves, the most individual, are actually the moments where the ghosts of past artists are speaking the loudest through them.
It completely flips the script.
It does. You think you're hearing a completely new voice, but you're actually hearing a deeply synthesized echo of the past.
And he is careful to clarify here. He isn't talking about the impressionable period of adolescence.
Oh, like when a young writer is just blatantly copying their hero.
Exactly. We all know that phase. They read Hemingway, and suddenly everything they write is short, clipped, and devoid of adjectives. That's just imitation.
Right.
Eliot means in the period of full, mature artistic power. True maturity in an artist isn't a violent rebellion against the past. It's a profound, complex resonance with it.
It's when the lessons and the rhythms and the insights of the ancestors have been so thoroughly absorbed that they become the invisible foundation for the artist's most defining work.
Exactly.
I want you, the listener, to really think about this for a second. Think about how you evaluate the creators you admire today, the filmmakers, the musicians, the authors. Do you praise them because you genuinely believe they're operating in a total vacuum, completely isolated from history?
Probably not when you really think about it.
Right. Or do you see the deeper value in how they are conversing with their influences? Because Eliot is asking us to completely rewire our critical brains here. We have to stop looking for the isolated weirdo and start looking for the connected master.
But we do have to be very precise here because Eliot anticipates the obvious misunderstanding. He's extremely careful to distinguish this resonance from blind, lazy imitation.
Oh, for sure.
He says that if tradition just consisted of following the immediate generation before us, in a blind or timid adherence to its successes, then tradition should positively be discouraged.
Right, because novelty, even cheap novelty, is better than mindless repetition. Just copying the last successful guy is how a culture gets lost in the sand, to use his kind of imagery.
Exactly.
So if tradition isn't just a dead archaeological reconstruction to put behind glass, and it isn't just blindly copying the immediate past to play it safe, then what is it? How does an artist actually connect with this tradition if they aren't just mimicking it?
This brings us to the core of Eliot's redefinition. He states that tradition cannot simply be inherited.
You aren't born with it.
No, you can't catch it like a cold just by being born in a certain country or going to a certain school. If you want it, you must obtain it by great labor. It is an active, strenuous pursuit.
And this great labor involves acquiring what he famously calls the historical sense.
Yes, the historical sense.
He actually throws a bit of shade here, which I absolutely love.
Yeah.
He says this historical sense is nearly indispensable for anyone who wants to continue being a poet beyond their 25th year.
It's a great little dig at youth culture.
It really is. It's easy to write poetry in your teens and early 20s, running on pure hormonal angst and first heartbreaks. But when you hit 26 and the angst wears off, how do you keep writing? You need this historical sense. So break this down for us. What exactly is it?
He defines it as a perception not only the pastness of the past, but of its presence.
Okay, pastness and presence.
Right. It compels a writer to write Not just with their own generation in their phones, but with the feeling that the whole of the literature of Europe, from Homer down to their own country's literature, has a simultaneous existence.
A simultaneous
Yes,
existence.
it composes a simultaneous order.
Okay, I have to use an analogy here because this concept of a simultaneous order is massive and it can sound a bit academic.
Go for it.
Imagine a massive, timeless group chat on your phone. In this chat, you have Homer, you have Shakespeare, you have Dante, you have Virginia Woolf, and you have a 21st century writer all sitting there typing at the exact same time.
Oh, I love that.
The read receipts are on, the typing bubbles are popping up. Homer isn't just some dead guy from antiquity whose texts are decaying in a vault. His message is right there on the screen, live, interacting with the message Shakespeare just sent and the message you are typing right now.
That is a remarkably accurate and helpful way to visualize Eliot's point. The historical sense means recognizing that time, in the realm of art, isn't a straight vanishing line where the past gets further away and fainter.
Right.
It's a flat plane where everything exists at once. This dual sense of the timeless and of the temporal and of both of them together is what actually makes a writer traditional.
And paradoxically, Eliot argues that this exact same sense is what makes a writer most acutely conscious of their own place in time, of their own contemporaneity.
Exactly.
Because you can't possibly know where you stand today unless you can clearly see everyone else standing around you in this timeless space. You need the grid to plot your own coordinates.
You need to see the whole chat history.
Exactly. But looking at this massive group chat brings up a really tricky, almost uncomfortable question from the text. Eliot points out that the mind of Europe, this collective mind that the poet must connect to, is a mind that changes.
Yes, it is always developing.
But he insists it's a development that abandons nothing en route. It doesn't superannuate or retire Shakespeare or Homer or even the rock drawings of the Magdalenian cave draftsmen.
Right. The caves paintings are still in the chat.
So my question is this. If we never leave anything behind, if the cave painting is still hanging out in the chat with Shakespeare and a modern novelist, does art actually improve over time? Surely the invention of the novel or the psychological depth of modernism represents a literal improvement over people drawing stick figures of deer on a cave wall, right?
It's the natural assumption of the modern mind to view history as a staircase of progress. We always think newer is better.
Yeah.
But Eliot tackles this directly, and his answer is a definitive, uncompromising no. He says the poet must be quite aware of the obvious fact that art never improves.
Wait, never, not even a little.
Not in its essence, no. He clarifies that while art never improves, the material of art is never quite the same.
Okay, the material changes.
Exactly. There might be refinement, there might certainly be complication, perhaps due to complex economics, or the advent of machinery, or new psychological theories.
Like Freud coming along and changing how we think about characters.
Right. But from the point of view of the artist, this complication is not an aesthetic improvement. A brilliant modernist novel is not better art than a brilliant cave painting. They are both complete and perfect expressions of their specific material within that simultaneous order.
I love how he frames the counterargument to this. He says, somebody once said, well, the dead writers are remote from us because we know so much more than they did.
It's that arrogant presentism we all suffer from.
Totally. We look back and think, oh, they didn't have the internet, they didn't understand quantum physics, they were so simple.
And Eliot's response to that arrogance is just incredibly sharp. He replies precisely, and they are that which we know.
Boom. I mean, just mic drop.
It's a brilliant rhetorical move. We don't know more than them because we are inherently smarter or biologically more advanced or somehow superior. We know more than them because our knowledge includes them.
Right.
The conscious present is an awareness of the past, in a way, and to an extent that the past could never have of itself. We are standing on their shoulders, yes, but they are the shoulders. They are the material of our knowing.
We have the advantage of hindsight, but they are the very material of that hindsight. So, okay, we've established this massive timeless group chat. We've established that art doesn't improve, it just changes its material. But what happens when someone new enters the chat?
This is where it gets really fun.
What happens when a modern artist drops a brand new masterpiece into this space? How does the chat react?
This is a crucial principle of aesthetic criticism for Eliot, and it completely disrupts our normal understanding of time. He states that no poet, no artist of any art has their complete meaning alone.
Right.
You cannot value an artist alone. You must set them, for contrast and comparison, among the dead.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Eliot doesn't just say we compare the new to the old. He says that the existing monuments of art, The great works of the past, the Homers and the Dantes, form an ideal order among themselves.
Yes. An ideal order.
This order is complete, it has a perfect internal logic. But then a new work arrives, and he specifies a really new work of art. Not
Yeah.
just a copy, but something genuinely novel. What happens next is a total mind-bender.
Eliot argues that what happens when a new work of art is created is something that happens simultaneously to all the works of art which preceded it.
Wait, what?
Right. For this existing order to persist after the introduction of novelty, the whole existing order must be, if ever so slightly, altered.
He writes, the past should be altered by the present as much as the present is directed by the past. I mean, wow. That completely reverses the arrow of time.
It really does.
We naturally assume causality only flows in one direction, forward. The past happens, and it influences the present. But Eliot is sitting here in 1919 saying, no, a truly great new poem literally reaches backward in time and changes the meaning of Shakespeare. How is that logically possible?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to think about how this works mechanically in human perception. Eliot says the relations, proportions, and values of each work of art toward the whole are readjusted.
Okay, visualize that for me.
Think of it like a complex, delicate mobile hanging from a ceiling, a system of carefully balanced weights.
Yeah, I see it.
When you place a new weight on one side of the scale, the entire structure doesn't just get heavier. Every single other piece shifts its position to accommodate the new reality. This constant, dynamic readjustment is what Eliot calls conformity between the old and the new.
And he makes a very fine, very important distinction here about that word conform. To conform doesn't mean to just politely copy the old work so you fit in seamlessly.
No, not at all.
Because if the new work merely conformed in that way, if it was just an archaeological reconstruction, it wouldn't be a new work. And therefore, it wouldn't trigger the readjustment. Its fitting in is the actual test of its value. It has to be new enough to force a shift, but traditional enough to still belong on the mobile.
Exactly. And let's bring this down to earth for the listener. Think about your favorite genre of music or your favorite film genre. Let's take the science fiction film.
Okay, classic sci-fi.
Before 1999, you had a mental order, a hierarchy of the classics. You had Metropolis, 2001,
Yeah.
A Space Odyssey, Blade Runner. They formed an ideal order of what sci-fi was.
Right, they define the boundaries.
But then, a truly groundbreaking new film is released. The Matrix.
Oh, that is a perfect way to look at it.
When The Matrix comes out, it doesn't just politely add its name to the bottom of the Wikipedia list for sci-fi films. It fundamentally changes how you go back and watch Blade Runner. It highlights different themes in 2001. A space odyssey that maybe felt dormant before. Suddenly, you're watching a film from 1968 and noticing its commentary on artificial intelligence in a completely different way because of what The Matrix did in 1999.
The relations and proportions of the entire sci-fi genre are permanently readjusted because this new, truly novel work has forced its way into the monumental order. The past has literally been altered by the present in the mind of the audience.
Exactly.
I've never thought about it like that, but it is so true. You cannot watch the older films without the new lens that the present has forcefully given you. The context of the past is completely rewritten by the present.
But Eliot warns that the poet, who is actually aware of this massive responsibility, the terrifying fact that they are theoretically altering the entire history of European literature with their new poem, will be aware of great difficulties.
I would be terrified.
They inevitably had to be judged by the standards of the past. Not amputated by them, not judged to be explicitly better or worse in a simplistic way, but measured by them.
It's a judgment of comparison. The new work is laid alongside the old to see how it shifts the gravity. But you're right, it raises an incredibly intimidating burden on the artist. If a poet must be judged by the standards of the entire past, and if they have to fit into this grand monumental order without just blindly copying it, how on earth do they acquire enough knowledge to do so?
That is the big question.
Exactly. Okay, if an artist's value is determined by how well they fit into this massive, towering history of European art, doesn't that require a paralyzing amount of studying? How do you create anything if your nose is buried in a textbook trying to absorb Homer and Dante?
Right, you'd never have time to write.
Eliot knows exactly what his critics are going to say. He says, I am alive to a usual objection. And the objection is that his doctrine requires a ridiculous amount of erudition, of pedantry. People will argue that demanding a poet know the entire mind of Europe will just deaden or pervert their natural poetic sensibility.
It's the classic fear of the academy, the fear that if you spend all your time studying in the library, you'll lose the spark of life. You'll become a dry, boring academic instead of a passionate, vibrant artist.
Yeah.
But Eliot pushes back on this by making a very sharp distinction between useless, superficial knowledge and an essential, deep consciousness of the past.
So, on behalf of every aspiring writer listening right now who is starting to panic, does a poet really have to sit down and read every single book in the British Museum to achieve greatness? Because that sounds like a miserable way to live.
No, thankfully not. And Eliot provides a brilliant counterexample to alleviate that exact fear. He brings up Shakespeare.
Okay, the ultimate example.
He notes that Shakespeare acquired more essential history from reading just one source, Plutarch's Lives, than most men could acquire from reading the entire content of the British Museum.
Okay, that is a huge relief. But why was Plutarch enough for Shakespeare? Why didn't he need the whole museum?
Because it's not about the sheer volume of data you consume. It's not about memorizing dates or historical trivia. It's about how deeply you absorb the essence of human history. The grand arcs, the deep motives, the enduring tragedies.
Right.
Shakespeare didn't need 1,000 history books. He needed one profound text that he could deeply synthesize into his understanding of the human condition.
That makes total sense.
Eliot says that while some exceptional people can naturally absorb this kind of knowledge almost through osmosis, the more tardy, which is his extremely polite, slightly condescending way of saying the rest of us, must sweat for it.
We have to sweat for it.
But we absolutely shouldn't confuse essential historical consciousness with the kind of pedantic trivia you use to pass exams or show off at dinner parties.
The goal isn't to be a walking encyclopedia or to win Jeopardy. The goal, as Eliot insists, is that the poet must develop or procure the consciousness of the past and continue to develop this consciousness throughout their entire career. It is an active, sweaty, ongoing process.
And what happens when an artist genuinely engages in this sweaty pursuit of historical consciousness? Eliot says the result is a continual surrender of the self, as they are at the moment, to something which is much more valuable.
A continual surrender.
Yes, the progress of an artist is a continual self-sacrifice, a continual extinction of personality.
A continual extinction of personality? That phrase just hits so hard. Because how does a human mind sacrifice itself without just becoming a robot?
It sounds kind of grim at first.
It does. And this brings us to the very threshold of his most famous and certainly his most contentious argument. He tells us that to define this process of depersonalization, we need to look away from literature for a moment and look at science.
It's a brilliant rhetorical pivot. Eliot, this towering figure of high literary criticism, suddenly turns into a high school chemistry teacher.
I love this part.
He introduces the scientific analogy to explain exactly how an artist's mind should function under ideal conditions. He asks us to imagine a chamber containing two gases, oxygen and sulfur dioxide.
Okay. And into this chamber, a bit of finely filiated platinum is introduced. Now, under normal circumstances, these two gases might not interact meaningfully, but when the platinum is present, a chemical reaction occurs. The gases fuse and they form sulfurous acid. So what does this all mean for a poet?
Let's carefully walk through the elements of the analogy.
Yeah.
The two gases, the oxygen and sulfur dioxide, represent the raw materials of life. The experiences, the emotions, the fleeting feelings, the traumas and joys floating around in the ether.
Right, the stuff of everyday life.
The sulfurous acid that is produced by the reaction is the new work of art, the poem itself. But the most important, the most crucial part of this entire equation is the platinum.
The platinum. Eliot states explicitly that the mind of the poet is the shred of platinum. It is the catalyst. The chemical combination, the creation of art, only takes place if the platinum is present.
Yes.
However, and this is the crux of his entire theory, the newly formed sulfurous acid contains absolutely no trace of the platinum.
Not at all?
It's completely absent from the final product.
The platinum itself is completely unaffected by the violent chemical reaction it just facilitated. It remains inert, neutral, and unchanged. The poet's mind merely provided the environment for the reaction to occur. It didn't inject its own molecules, its own personality into the final product.
Eliot uses this to unpack a massive philosophical weight. He says that the more perfect the artist is, the more completely separate in them will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. asserts.
That is a staggering concept. The man who suffers and the mind which creates. It is a dividing line drawn right through the center of the human soul.
It really is. I mean, the man, the biological, psychological human being, goes out into the world. He gets his heart broken. He experiences profound grief. He gets cut off in traffic. He worries about paying rent. He suffers.
Right.
But the mind, the platinum, doesn't suffer. It doesn't cry. It just sits there, perfectly neutral, meticulously digesting and transmuting those passions. It's just a receptacle.
It's a total, uncompromising rejection of the ego in art. The poet's mind is a finely perfected medium in which special or very varied feelings are at liberty to enter into new combinations.
So it's not about having a more interesting personality.
Not at all. It's not necessarily a more interesting mind than anyone else's, and it doesn't necessarily have more to say. Its value is purely structural. It's a crucible.
I really want you, the listener, to pause and reflect on this in the context of your own life and your own work. Whether you write poetry or paint or write code or design buildings, think about the final product you make. How much of you, the actual literal person who deals with anxiety, who has a specific childhood, who has political opinions, is actually in that final product?
It's a tough question to answer, honestly.
Because Eliot is arguing that if you are a truly mature, perfect artist, the answer should be zero. The product should be entirely separate from your personal suffering.
It's a radical demand for objectivity, and frankly, it's a very difficult pill for modern audiences to swallow.
Especially today.
But to understand exactly what is reacting inside this platinum mind, we need to look much closer at the gases in Eliot's chamber. If it isn't the poet's personality, what exactly are the raw ingredients of art?
Right. Eliot breaks down the elements entering the presence of the catalyst. He says they are of two distinct kinds: emotions and feelings.
This distinction might seem subtle, but it's vital to his theory. The effect of a work of art upon the person who enjoys it is an experience completely different in kind from any experience not of art. It is a unique category of human experience.
Okay, so art emotions aren't real-world emotions.
Exactly. He says art can be formed out of one single emotion, or it can be a combination of several. It can also include various feelings, which, for a writer, often naturally adhere to particular words, phrases, or images.
Or perhaps most surprisingly, Eliot says great poetry can be made without the direct use of any emotion whatever. It can be composed out of feelings solely.
Yes, just pure feelings.
Okay, we need to ground this because emotions versus feelings can get very abstract very quickly. To prove this point, Eliot takes us on a deep textual dive through some of the greatest hits of Western literature. And this is where we have to slow down and really look at the mechanics of what he's arguing.
Let's do it.
He starts by comparing two sections of Dante's Inferno. He looks at Canto XV and compares it to Canto XT6.
Yes. In Canto XV, Dante the Pilgrim encounters his former teacher, Brunetto Latini, suffering in hell. It's an incredibly poignant, emotionally charged scene.
Because he respects this guy, and now he's seeing him in torment.
Exactly. Eliot notes that the poetry here is a working up of the emotion evident in the situation. The emotion is structural. It belongs directly to the narrative scenario of seeing a respected mentor degraded.
It's a relatable human emotion. You read it and you feel the specific sadness of that situation. But then Eliot contrasts this with Canto XC6, which is the famous Ulysses episode.
Right. In Canto XC6, Ulysses gives this sweeping, epic speech about his final doomed voyage beyond the boundaries of the known world.
So it's not a one-on-one personal tragedy.
No. Eliot points out that this canto, while undeniably brilliant and intensely powerful, does not have a direct dependence upon a specific identifiable emotion in the same way Canto XV does. The power doesn't come from a simple, relatable human interaction. It comes from a complex fusion of imagery, ambition, and narrative momentum.
Yet both cantos achieve the intense, unmistakable effect of a great work of art. The inputs are different, but the chemical reaction in the platinum mind yields the same high-level result.
Exactly. He does something similar by comparing two classic plays. He compares the murder of Agamemnon to the agony of Othello.
Oh, this is a great comparison.
He notes that in the play Agamemnon, the artistic emotion feels like the emotion of an actual spectator witnessing the event. It's the horror of watching a tragedy unfold from the outside.
Right.
But in Othello, the emotion approximates the emotion of the protagonist himself. It's internal, consuming jealousy and despair. Again, Eliot is showing us the massive variety in how elements are fused.
And we absolutely cannot forget his analysis of John Keats's Ode to a Nightingale. This is a perfect example of how the creative mind works, according to Eliot. He points out that Keats's ode contains a number of feelings that actually have nothing particular to do with a biological nightingale.
Right. The bird itself is almost incidental.
The nightingale, perhaps because of its attractive name or its established literary reputation, just served as a convenient focal point. It was the catalyst that brought all these floating, disparate feelings, thoughts on mortality, beauty, intoxication, fading youth together into one contained reaction.
There is also that incredible quote he pulls from Cyril Tourneur's play, The Revenger's Tragedy.
Oh yeah, the skull scene.
Yes, the character Vindis is holding the skull of his murdered lover, and he says, "And now he thinks I could e'en chide myself for doting on her beauty." And it goes on this bizarre tangent, talking about the silkworm expending her yellow labors and lords selling their lands to maintain ladies. It's such a strange, striking passage.
It really is out of nowhere.
Eliot uses this to show how complex the fusion can be. He notes that the basic balance of contrasted emotion, the morbid attraction to beauty, and the cynical fascination with the ugliness that inevitably destroys it, is dictated by the dramatic situation of the play. He calls that the structural emotion.
Okay, structural emotion.
But the dominant tone, the true magic of the passage that makes it memorable poetry, comes from a number of floating feelings. The imagery of the silkworm, the bankrupt lords that just happen to have an affinity to this central emotion. They combine with it in the crucible of the poet's mind to give us a brand new art emotion.
Okay, wait, I need clarification here. Because you're listing all these incredible examples, Dante, Shakespeare, Keats, and all of them deal with massive, intense things. Murder, hell, agonizing jealousy, mortality. If we have structural emotions, floating feelings, all these heavy literary examples, why does Eliot insist that the greatness of poetry isn't about the intensity of the emotions themselves?
That's a great question.
If Othello's agony is incredibly intense, and that intensity is what I feel as an audience member, isn't that why the play is great?
This is a crucial point, and it's where people most frequently misread Eliot. He explicitly states that it is not the greatness or the intensity of the emotional components that matters. Think about it this way. A teenager's diary, written after their first breakup, is full of incredibly intense, authentic, powerful emotions.
True. Very intense.
But a teenager's diary usually isn't great art.
Usually pretty terrible to read, actually.
Right. Because what counts is not the intensity of the raw emotion, but the intensity of the artistic process.
The pressure cooker.
Precisely. It is the pressure under which the fusion takes place. The mind of the poet is constantly seizing and storing up numberless feelings, phrases, and images. They just sit there in suspension.
Like the gases in the chamber.
Exactly. Then, when the pressure in the chamber is high enough, and the right combination is present, they fuse into a new compound. The intensity, the greatness, is in the chemical reaction itself, not the raw ingredients.
That makes so much sense. It explains why you can have a masterpiece written about something completely mundane, like a wheelbarrow or a quiet evening, and you can have a completely terrible, unreadable poem written about a profound historical tragedy.
The subject matter doesn't guarantee the art.
It's all about the pressure of the artist infusion. And this intense pressure cooker of a mind leads us directly to Eliot's ultimate, devastating rejection of the prevailing artistic theory of his time.
Yes. Eliot uses all of this rigorous groundwork, the definition of tradition, the simultaneous order, the platinum catalyst, to arrive at his anti-romantic conclusion. He directly attacks the idea that a poet should try to find new or eccentric human emotions to express.
He argues that seeking novelty in the wrong place just leads to the perverse. It's an error of eccentricity. The business of the poet is not to go out and try to feel weird new things just so they have something unique to say.
No, their business is to use completely ordinary emotions and work them up to express feelings that aren't even found in actual life.
He even goes so far as to say that emotions the poet has never actually experienced in their real life will serve just as well as familiar ones. The poet's own personal emotions might be simple or crude or flat, but the emotion in their poetry will be a very complex thing.
Not because the poet is a highly complex, tortured person in real life, but because the medium of their art, the language in the tradition, is complex.
Okay, I have to vigorously play devil's advocate here, because Eliot is just completely dismantling the entire foundation of Romanticism. Wait, Isn't the entire point of art to express yourself? What about William Wordsworth?
Oh, yeah.
Wordsworth gave us what is basically the golden rule of poetry for the entire 19th century. He famously defined poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and he said that it takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility. That has been the textbook definition of poetry for 100 years before Eliot wrote this essay.
You're absolutely right. Wordsworth's definition was the reigning dogma. The Romantic era was obsessed with the individual ego, largely as a reaction to the Industrial Revolution. They elevated the individual's spontaneous feelings above all else.
So how does Eliot handle that?
Eliot addresses Wordsworth's golden rule directly, and his takedown is absolute. He calls emotion recollected in tranquility an inexact formula. In fact, he dissects it word by word.
It's like he's sitting there crossing out Wordsworth's textbook with a red pen. Wrong, wrong, wrong.
Right.
If it isn't any of those things, what is it?
Eliot says the process of creating great art is neither emotion nor recollection, nor without distorting the meaning of the word tranquility.
He just wipes the whole board clean.
He does. It is instead a massive unconscious concentration of experiences. A concentration of a very great number of experiences, which to a normal practical person wouldn't even seem like experiences at all.
So it's not like sitting in a quiet room, opening your mental photo album, and consciously recollecting the time you were sad.
Exactly. These experiences aren't consciously recollected. They finally unite in an atmosphere that is only tranquil in the sense that the poet's mind is passively attending upon the event, much like the neutral platinum catalyst sitting quietly in the chamber while the gases violently react around it.
Though he does concede that not everything is unconscious. He's not advocating for just entering a trance and writing gibberish.
Right, it's not automatic writing.
He says there is a great deal in writing poetry that must be highly conscious and deliberate. But he gives us this perfect diagnostic tool to separate the good from the bad. He says the bad poet is usually unconscious where they ought to be conscious, and conscious where they ought to be unconscious.
That misdirection of consciousness is exactly what makes bad poetry too personal.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
A bad poet is deliberately, consciously trying to inject their personality, their specific trauma, their ego into the poem. They are focusing on themselves when they should be consciously working on the technical excellence, the form, the language, the tradition.
And this brings us to the climactic thesis statement of the entire essay. The quote that essentially shook the literary world and redirected academic criticism for decades.
Let's hear it.
Eliot writes, "Poetry is not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality, but an escape from personality."
It is a complete, violent paradigm shift. His goal is to divert our interest away from the poet entirely and strictly onto the poetry. To stop looking for biographical clues and start looking for significant emotion. Emotion that has its life entirely within the boundaries of the poem and not in the history or the biography of the poet.
But I love the little wry caveat he adds right after that sweeping, severe statement. He says, "But of course, only those who have personality and emotions know what it means to want to escape from these things."
It's almost a little wink to the reader.
It is. You can't escape a room you aren't in. You have to have a rich inner life. You must deeply feel the world to understand the immense labor required to transcend it.
It is the ultimate paradox of his theory. To be a great poet, you must obtain this massive historical sense. You must cultivate your mind, absorb the mind of Europe from Homer to the present day. You must feel deeply, and then you must sacrifice all of it. You must extinguish your personality so the art can live independently.
I really want you to keep that in mind the next time you hear a song on the radio or read a contemporary novel or look at a painting. Try to resist that automatic assumption that it's just a literal diary entry. Look for the art emotion, the chemical reaction, not the personal emotion of the creator.
It's a much more rewarding way to engage with art, frankly.
It really is. Well, what an incredible, dense journey we've been on today. To quickly synthesize what we've unpacked, we watched Eliot completely redefine tradition. He took it from a dusty, agreeable archaeological relic and turned it into a massive, living, simultaneous order that exists all at once.
A huge conceptual leap.
Huge. We explored the mind-bending concept of how a truly new work actually travels backward in time to alter the meaning of the past. We walked through the chemistry of the mind, the platinum catalyst. And finally, we saw the focus of criticism shifted entirely away from the messy personal life of the suffering man and placed firmly onto the neutral, highly pressurized mind that creates.
It forces us to ask for the poem itself, rather than settling for the confused cries of critics talking about the poet's life. It demands that we elevate our own critical habits. It's a challenging theory, but it elevates art to a realm of timeless significance.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into tradition and the individual talent. We covered a massive amount of ground today, from the timeless group chat of history to the high-pressure chemistry of the creative mind. But as we sign off, I want to leave you with one final lingering thought that builds on everything we've debated today.
I'd love to hear it.
If art is truly an escape from personality, as Eliot violently argues, if the artist's mind is just a neutral chemical catalyst reacting to the vast, timeless mind of Europe, then who really owns the meaning of a poem?
Oh, wow.
Is it the creator who suffered, but actively labored to leave themselves out of it? Is it the historical tradition that provided all the raw materials and the structure? Or is it you, the audience, walking into the gallery expecting an X-ray of someone's soul, but instead experiencing a brand new, independent art emotion that never existed anywhere else in the universe until you interacted with it?
That is a fascinating question to end on.
Something to think about the next time you look at a blank canvas or open a new book. Until next time.